Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran and this is episode 89 of season 2. In my last episode, Mysore had cleared the field in the region and Chikadeva's regime was superbly administered. But Chikadeva Raja's successors were not him. They didn't have his chops. They had neither the vision nor the competence to control the high-performance engine that Chikadeva had built. Soon, the reins slipped from their hands into the hands of the kingdom's generals who were far better administrators. These were the Dalabais, and they took over the administration. At first, they had to be furtive about it. But their successor was a man who slipped into the role with no intention of hiding it, Hyder Ali. To understand Hyder Ali, though, we must first understand the events of the year 1739 and the Persian king Nadir Shah, who walked into Delhi empty-handed and walked out with the entire wealth of the Mughal Empire. Buckle up, this is going to be a good ride. But my first stop is to thank my sponsors, the Prestige Group, for their corporate generosity. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. In Delhi, the Mughal Empire, by the early 18th century, was the structure that had outlasted its foundations. The administrative machinery still functioned, imperial orders were still issued, but the authority behind those orders had thinned to the point of transparency. This decline had been underway for decades. Provincial governors had been declaring de facto independence while maintaining only the fiction of Mughal suzerainty. Even as early as 1724, Asaf Jah I of Hyderabad had ceased to obey instructions from Delhi. The Nawab of Awadh, the Marathas, the rulers of Bengal, all of them operated on similar principles. And now, the Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah, or Rangila as he was known, remained useful only to legitimize these regional kingdoms. What ended even that fiction was a man who had no interest in Mughal legitimacy whatsoever, Nadir Shah, the Persian conqueror who arrived at the gates of Delhi in 1739 and in the space of only a few weeks stripped the Mughal Empire of all its wealth and exposed its military frailty to the entire world and then simply upped and left. As has happened in the case of almost every history that I have brought you, Nadir Shah's invasion happened because of a betrayal. After defeating the Mughal army in the Battle of Karnal, Nadir Shah had initially agreed to withdraw in exchange for a payment of 2 crores of rupees. This negotiated amount, the settlement, had been brokered by a Mughal general, Al-Mulk. But it was a senior Mughal functionary, Burhan-ul-Mulk, also known as Saadat Khan, who undermined it. According to the historian Ferishta, Saadat Khan passed over for a coveted court position and, disappointed and nursing a grievance, approached Nadir Shah privately and informed him that 2 crores was a pittance against the true wealth of Delhi. He urged Nadir Shah to march into the capital and take the entire imperial treasury itself. Nadir Shah needed no persuasion for this. On the 9th of March 1739, Nadir Shah entered Delhi. His sole objective was extraction. He was here for the wealth and for nothing else. For one day, the city was calm. Then someone started a rumor that spread right through the streets that Nadir Shah had been assassinated. In the general chaos that followed, the local population of Delhi turned on the occupying Persian forces and killed approximately 1,000 of them. The retribution was immediate and total. The following morning, Nadir Shah took his position at the college of Roshan-ud-Dawla and gave the order for a general slaughter. For several hours, Persian soldiers moved through the city, killing without distinction. By the time the Mughal emperor managed to reach Nadir Shah around midday, got on his knees and pleaded for mercy, an estimated 8,000 people had already been killed, and a large section of the city had been consumed by fire. And then the systematic looting began. The scale of what the Persian forces removed from Delhi was and remains one of the most staggering acts of concentrated wealth extraction in human history. From the imperial treasury alone, in cash and bullion, 3 crores 50 lakhs of rupees, in plate another 1 crore 50 lakhs, in precious jewels 15 crores, and then the Peacock Throne, that masterpiece of Mughal craftsmanship set with diamonds, rubies and emerald, worth just 1 crore on its own, and then scores of other thrones, the regalia of dozens of dynasties, and the accumulated wealth of over a century of very successful Mughal imperial consolidation. The historian William Drimple, describing Nadir Shah's departure, wrote that the caravan of riches required 700 elephants, 4,000 camels, and 12,000 horses to carry. The total value of the plunder was estimated at approximately 87.5 million pounds, and this in the 18th century. Nadir Shah walked into Delhi, and he walked out, and the Mughal Empire never recovered. By the middle of the 18th century, the Emperor Muhammad Shah Rangila sat on a throne that had been stripped of everything except the throne itself. He was no longer even an effective arbiter of power. The Nizam of Hyderabad after 1739 stopped maintaining even the fiction of obedience. The Marathas had pressed south and east without restraint. Provincial governors, who until now had only spoken in tones of deference and respect, now simply noted that Delhi had nothing left to offer them. India was reaching a post-imperial phase, one in which authority was fragmented, negotiated locally by different people, one-on-one, and enforced through force rather than through hierarchy. And through that fracture, two forces moved simultaneously, one from the north, the Marathas, filling the power vacuum left by the Mughals, and the other from the sea, the English East India Company, which had been operating on the Coromandel coast for over a century, saw for the first time a continent-sized opportunity. And now for a commercial break, and when I come back, the rest of the consequences of Nadir Shah and the fall of the Mughals, right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. Radar approved.
It is important to be precise about what Nadir Shah's sack of Delhi meant for the south, especially for Bengaluru. The Mughal Empire never exercised deep or consistent control over southern Karnataka. Its presence in the south was intermittent and always negotiated. The south did not experience the Mughal imperial collapse in the same way that the north did. What the south experienced instead was a prolonged imperial absence, a condition that Mysore had been rising inside for decades. But the indirect consequences of 1739 were real and decisive, and they reshaped the political geometry within which Hyder Ali would come to operate. The first consequence was Hyderabad. As long as Nizam enjoyed the protection of Delhi, Mysore always had to account for the possibility that the Mughals would intervene through the Nizam's forces. Now that constraint vanished after 1739, and Hyderabad, suddenly exposed, was drawn into this orbit of competing powers, the Marathas pressing from the north, the East India Company doing their thing along the Coromandel coast, and Mysore growing alarmingly in size and power, pushing upwards from the south. Of these three, Mysore was the most vested in the new dynamic. The second consequence was the Carnatic. The southern Carnatic were areas inside Tamil Nadu near Arcot, and the North Carnatic included the northern Sarkars in the Telugu-speaking lands. Now that vast eastern coastal plain stretched all the way from Krishna in the north to the Kaveri in the south. The Carnatic was that strategic buffer between the British headquarters in Madras and the interior of the subcontinent, which is the central Deccan Plateau. Now, with the Mughal authority gone, control of the Carnatic became a central prize in the southern contests. The Carnatic had nominally been under the Nawabs of our court, originally Mughal appointees who had, like everyone else, converted their delegated authority into something like independent rule. The Nawabs of our court were not powerful rulers themselves, they were convenient clients, and the British at Madras had long understood the value of a weak but legitimate local authority whose survival could now depend on British support. Off to the south were the French operating from Pondicherry further down the coast, and they understood the same thing. And the result was the Carnatic Wars. That was a series of battles between the French and the English that was fought not always directly, but through Indian proxies, and the objective, control of the Carnatic and all its revenues. The First Carnatic War, which lasted from 1746 to 1748, 2 years, was essentially an extension of the War of Austrian Succession into the Indian waters. It began when a French naval squadron under La Bourdonnais captured Madras from the British, and ended when the peace treaty returned Madras to the British and restored the status quo. But for the two European parties, Britain and France, the First Carnatic War was an inconclusive engagement. But for the Indian soldiers and the commanders who watched it, it was an education. One of those watching was a young man serving as a volunteer in his brother's cavalry unit. His name was Hyder Ali, witnessing for the first time how a small disciplined force of European infantry and trained sepoys could destroy a vastly large, unorganized Indian cavalry charge, just doing this through well-coordinated musketry and artillery. Hyder Ali keenly observed the contrast between European military methods and the older Indian practices, and he drew his conclusions and spent the rest of his life acting on those conclusions. Then came the Second Carnatic War from 1749 to 1754, this time directly contesting which candidate, the French-backed or the British-backed, would sit on the throne of the Carnatic. The French governor, Joseph-François Dupleix, backed one candidate, the British backed another. The war was fought across the plains of the Carnatic and the forts of the Tamil country, and again it ended inconclusively. Dupleix was recalled to France, and the French position weakened immediately, but it established the pattern that would define southern Indian politics for the next 50 years. The European companies were no longer traders supplementing their commercial activity with armed escorts. They were now territorial powers fighting for the right to determine who ruled on the land. Would it be Britain or would it be France? For Mysore, watching from the plateau above them, these wars were simultaneously threatening and instructive. Threatening because these two European powers were now competing to control the coastal approaches to the south, and whoever controlled the Carnatic controlled the access routes to and from the Mysore territory. Instructive because the Carnatic Wars demonstrated clearly that the future of southern Indian politics would be decided not by cavalry, not by elephant, not by large numbers of soldiers, but by disciplined infantry, reliable artillery, and the ability to sustain armies over long campaigns. Hyder Ali absorbed that lesson at Pondicherry in 1746, and by the time he rose to dominate Mysore, which he would do by stages between 1749 and 1761, he would build the only indigenous army in southern India capable of meeting the company's forces on something that approached equal terms. The world that Hyder Ali inherited was therefore a world of fracture and opportunity in equal measure. The Mughal north had been hollowed out by Nadir Shah and abandoned to the Marathas. The Carnatic coast was contested between the two European companies, the British and the French East India Company, whose commercial rivalry had metastasized into territorial warfare. Hyderabad was exposed, it was unstable, and available to whoever could offer the most compelling combination of military alliance and let's call it financial inducement. And Mysore, where the Dalawais ran the state in the name of a ceremonial king, was the most institutionally coherent power in the south. Into that landscape walked Hyder Ali, a man born near Kolar in approximately 1720, the son of a professional soldier. After his father's death, raised by an uncle who taught him cavalry and combat, who had seen what a disciplined European force could do to a larger, unorganized army, and who had decided with extraordinary clarity of purpose what kind of a state he inherited to build. Again, this was the beginning of Hyder Ali. In my next episode, I will introduce you properly to Hyder Ali, his origins, and his early career, and how an illiterate volunteer soldier became one of the most formidable kings in 18th century India. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the history of Bangalore.